All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and skip like a long introduction or anything like that because we're limited on time, and we would like to start this conversation by Marcus is going to generally explain at a high level how the subnet and subnet architecture work, the relationship between the subnet owner, the validators, the miners, so on and so forth. Just so I want this to be, and we both want this to be educational, informational for the public, and everything that we're going to be going over, we're going to reference later in the video. And so we're doing this for context. So later on in the video, for people who don't really know that much about Bittensor, they at least have some background information on how the system works in a general sense. That being said, and I greatly appreciate Marcus taking his time to have this conversation and or debate today. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to put myself on mute and he's going to give a high level explanation of how this works.
I don't think anyone's ever asked me for a bit tensor explanation and then said, but we're limited on time. There we go. See what we can do. You booked 90 minutes. Let's see what we can do. So yes, let's have a little bit of conversation about bit tensor at a higher level. What bit tensor it does is it's essentially a platform for incentivized distribution or incentivizing compute and workflows across distributed contributors to a network. So to put that down into a simple way, if you look at a subnet, which is what sort of exists within BitTensor, each individual business, each individual entity, a subnet is tasked with creating a commodity, well, creating the incentivization for creating a commodity. Whether that be inference, whether that be actually a digital commodity like GPU rental, storage, video compression. And so what happens is a subnet owner, they register this. We can't say business because businesses are a subnet is often one aspect of a business. A subnet doesn't have to have a business associated with it. It could be sort of completely separated from any business entity and just be a sort of self-sufficient entity. But very often they are associated to businesses who are taking fiat payments for services or looking to sell the outputs. And what happens is the subnet owner and the subnet owner team, rather than a lot of people would have in-house within their business a problem that they've been trying to solve internally, whether it's applying inference by buying a shitload of GPUs, whether it's employing a bunch of quants to solve tough financial algorithms, whether it's hoarding hard drives to provide storage, whatever it may be that you were trying to do in-house. You can now outsource that workflow to a decentralized workforce, essentially, who will compete to do it best. So instead of now concentrating on building that commodity or supplying that commodity, actually what you now do is you create an incentive mechanism to accurately judge and score the production of that commodity. Well, it sounds easy. Let's say, oh, instead of us digging for gold, we're going to pay a whole bunch of miners to go out and dig for gold. And we will, we'll judge them by the amount of gold that we'll measure in weight. Great. There's our incentive mechanism. Check weight. If weight is high, pay more. Hold on a minute. They were putting rocks in there. Okay. If is weight and is colored gold, pay more. Oh, hold on a minute. Now they're just painting the rocks a gold color. So as you do this, what happens is the miners who are performing this work, they try and optimize for whatever rules you create, which creates this very, very nuanced, balanced workflow for a subnet owner that you have to create a market around your commodity, normally satisfying an existing market that you might have and a product that you might have. But you also need to create an incentive mechanism whereby you incentivize the miners to produce, and as a validator or in quorum with the other validators on the network, you accurately judge and reach a consensus to the value of the work being performed by these miners so that you make sure you are giving the right rewards and the right amount of rewards to the right miners. That can then be applied across any industry that you can essentially structure the commodity production digitally. You can come off mute now. Well, I can keep going.
Okay, cool. So, and just for anybody who doesn't understand BitTensor at all, you could kind of, would you relate the subnets themselves to kind of like their own, I guess, application services, so on and so forth?
They're very different. So let's look at some of the top subnets. Top subnet at the moment is Shoots. What Shoots originally started off as inference, and then the ability it pivoted to be able to spin up your essentially serverless model deployment. So you can deploy your models without having to spin up a server, where they spin up the servers, and then they incentivize the miners to be running popular models, popular open source models. They were providing inference to OpenRouter. So they provide serverless compute and inference at scale. They are the largest open source model provider to OpenRouter. They're serving billions of tokens a day. Next one down, you have Athene. Athene is doing fine tuning and optimization of existing models by optimizing for loss on model training. It's about as far as my expertise goes in that particular department. Something easy to understand. Liam, Targon, they are doing GPU rentals and CPU rentals, and in Targon's case, trusted encryption environment compute rentals, so the ability to essentially rent GPUs by the hour, by the minute, instantly at very competitive prices, which obviously we can understand the value of. Going down the list, something like Score is computer vision modeling. They incentivize miners to create optimized computer vision models for specific tasks that's then added into their application that they deploy across huge numbers of industries, from sports training to petrol station forecourts and things like this. I mean, I can go on. There's 128 of these, and
That's perfectly fine. Just in a general sense, subnet owner creates the subnet itself. He gets 18% of the overall emissions to that subnet. The validators are the ones that are checking. Subnet owner sets out the rules, basically for how the application or how the services or commodities work. Validators are the ones that check the work from the miners themselves. And the miners are going to be running their own AI models, producing whatever output. Let's just talk about a specific use case, so we can kind of like narrow the focus a little bit. Just like, let's just say text and image generation, just because that's like a common thing that everybody, is familiar with. And a lot of people use AI for text and image generation. And you're kind of, to some degree, positioning yourself as as a alternative to the big tech AI model. So subnet creates the subnet, lays out the rules. Validators are the ones that check the work from the miners. Miners are running on their own AI models and producing output for whatever prompt is coming in. Generally
correct.
accurate. Okay, cool. And then the validators will get 41% of the emissions. Miners will also get 41% of the emissions.
Yeah. It's worth
Okay,
noting on that the 41% that goes to the validators is given to their delegators, to people like you and I who buy Tau and decide to stake or own the alpha tokens in a subnet. You have to choose a validator. And so it's not 41% is going in the pockets of the validators, it's distributed to their nominators.
got it. Okay, cool. And what would you say is like if you were pitching this, I guess, to me or the audience, or looking at it from two different perspectives? Because when you're talking about AI, there's two main target markets. You have everything with like retail users just using basic general purpose LLMs for different things and or maybe for coding or other things like that. But you also have like the institutional space, corporations, enterprises, governments, so on and so forth. They're also going to be implementing and using AI in the workplace. So you have like two different target markets that both heavily use big tech AI right now. So if you were selling this to either just an end user or an institution, how would you differentiate? What would you say are the main differentiations from Bittensor and big tech? Like the value proposition for Bittensor, using Bittensor over using big tech AI?
But if you're going to keep it to something as which is not meant rudely lowest common denominator as image and text inference, which was something that Bittensor was focusing on achieving back in sort of GPT 3 days, a couple of years ago, it it's about the open source versus closed source model. Who controls your prompts, whether they're going through something private. You look at the differences between some, and then also efficiency. So you can compare models, something like OpenRouter. Why would I use OpenRouter versus Anthropic or OpenAI? Because it's more convenient. They've created a product that for me as a user is just optimal. There's routing involved. Now there's a new subnet 28 GM that does exactly that. You look at something like Venice. Again, it's a crypto project. I'm using hopefully projects that people will be familiar with. They are putting their open source inference through trusted encryption environment. I'm not sure they're doing it with their closed source models. Again, subnets on Bittensor are doing this. So it's creating products that are financially competitive and optimal. There is always a privacy element to it, which obviously running things within trusted encryption environments, which Shoots are doing. But inference is something that Bittensor, whilst we have subnets that serve that, it's not really where the main focus is, because that's solved. It's inference is inference. We just want it to be as good as whatever model we want to use at the moment. The reality is a lot of people are using for their agents something like Claude Opus at the moment. So we're recording this in June. GLM 5.2 has come out. People are comparing. The tide flows towards whatever models the industry is pushing, and that thankfully is a very fluid dynamic. So in answer, I can really answer this question not related to inference. So let's look at storage. Why would you use Bittensor as a storage solution versus S3 or Dropbox? So S3 as a developer, Dropbox as a consumer. It's massively cheaper, and no single company controls your data. Easy. Why would you use it for vision modeling? Because the models being developed on Bittensor don't exist anywhere else. The crowdsource optimization of these skills and models goes beyond what is available in closed source technology right now. Why would you use it for GPUs? It is multiple times cheaper and available now. I was at a proof of talk conference, and I was seeing a crypto native but slightly more centralized GPU provider, and their tagline was, have your GPUs up and running within 24 hours or 48 hours. And I thought, and they were next to a Bittensor stand who I knew. You click and it's there. We're working in an agentic world these days, and if your agents can't instantly connect and access the commodities, then you're behind.
Got it. Okay, let me just make sure I'm not. Yeah, I'm not on mute. Just had to double check. Okay. All right. So I want to get into like the validator level itself. So validators, their overall, and when I use the term grades, I might use the term grades and weights synonymously here. Just heads up. But at the validator level, their overall, what I would call voting power, when they're grading the miner's output, their overall voting power, validator to validator, is based on a stake weighting program, correct? So however much they have staked is going to determine how much of the overall voting power for each individual miner grade there is. That's a generally okay, cool. I just wanted to make that point, because when you're looking at multiple different validators, they're going to have drastically different voting power, validator to validator, just based on how much they have staked.
Not just an overall, but also on individual subnets. So I can take you back and give you a little bit of history on validators, because the role of validators in Bittensor is particularly nuanced, often criticized, and more commonly misunderstood. And it's very different to what we think when we think of a validator on a proof of stake network with slashing and custodial elements and smart contracts. The validators originally, they're not the chain validators, and they are not the validators producing the blocks for the actual Bittensor chain. That's another set of validators completely that the public don't stake to. It's not a proof of stake. There is a talk of an evolution to a nominated proof of stake on that, but that's a whole other evolution. Validators pre-March 2020, pre-April 2025, there were only really root staking. So validators had Tau. There was only Tau. The more Tau you had, as you say, the higher weight your vote carried. And most of the validators were the early contributors to the network. The Open Tensor Foundation, who was the foundation behind the creation of the network. UMA, which was previously DCG, who have always been interested and supported network from early on and had an early stake. Ourselves, Tau Stats, as contributors of software and visualization and subnets, we've always been quite popular. So they were people that really had a lot of skin in the game and really cared about where the network was going. And it was often criticized that they decided the flow of emissions to subnets. It's been quite interesting. We had to move away from this. But at the same time, in the early days, it really helped keep shit off the network. There's no porn subnets. There's no meme coin subnets. There's just nothing that doesn't really bring value to the network, uncontested value by all participants, because the early validators just turned around and said no. The people involved in Bittensor early really care about the network. After April 2025, we shifted to dTau, which actually created much more power for subnets. Each subnet has its own token, an alpha token, which is a staked derivative of Tau. So you have to stake Tau and then swap that, or go from Tau into an alpha token, which is still technically stake. And what that means is that although validators still have root, they also hold alpha. And the amount of alpha that you have is more important to your weight on that subnet. So let's say, Tau stats might be the second biggest validator overall, but on subnet X, we're the 15th biggest validator because we don't care about it. We don't hold any of its alpha. People that stake don't stake to us. They stake to the owner or some other entity that's involved. So you can have a different flow of validator importance and weighting on subnets. And the reason that that's important is the person best, or the entity best suited to iterate quickly and essentially have control over the incentive mechanism on a subnet is actually the subnet owner, unless they're being naughty. And in which case the validators can wade in and say, hey guys, no, you guys are obviously just scamming. We're going to use our collective validator weight and send your emissions elsewhere. So validators can come in and police, essentially, but we do like to give subnets the benefit of the doubt and allow them, if they need it, control moving forward. So you'll see on a lot of subnets a huge amount of weight assigned to what they call the owner key. Every subnet owner gets its own validator key by default, and what we tend to do is encourage weight and stake towards that entity. It differs from different subnets. There are different rules and parameters that can be set, but that's the landscape of the validators and the validation. And then it's up to the subnet owners how they write their incentive mechanism and the involvement they require of validators to perform checking. The ideology of all validators have to run on every single subnet the same infrastructure just wasn't scalable. If you need GPU to validate responses, to reproduce scores, and you're having 12 validators on 128 subnets running GPU, that's not cost efficient. That's wasteful. And so this was stamped out fairly quickly. And what Bittensor tends to do is funnel towards an optimization of costs, of quality of outputs, etc. And that is one of the side effects of it, and where our current validation model goes towards. As we evolve, what validators are now moving towards is on the other side of police, I would say it's more due diligence and understanding and guidance of stakers through their choice of which subnets to support. This might get a bit too complicated for those that don't know anything about Bittensor, but you can choose to delegate to subnets, but you can also choose to hold your Tau in root, to stake it in root. If you're holding it in root, technically you're receiving a little bit from every single subnet, which has inherent network effects that we want to stop on those subnets and their liquidity pools. So now we're allowing essentially validators to devise baskets. For validates, I'll give the easy example, myself as Tau Stats, to say, look, these 20 subnets or these 30 subnets we like. This is the weighting that we're giving them in terms of importance. If you stake with us, we get rid of the rest, and we will funnel your rewards into these subnets because we believe they have value and they're appreciating, a bit like a fund manager. And when you want to take, when you want to claim, you still claim and you get it back as Tau. But what this does is it allows validators to steer a little bit more the economic flow of funds through the subnets.
Got it. Okay, cool. So let's just speaking hypothetically, or looking at the model, looking at the design, looking at the incentive structure and everything else. I just made my own little images just to explain different things. So for any given subnet, you're going to have X number of miners, you're going to have X number of validators, so on and so forth, right? And I just picked image and text generation. I know the subnets do numerous other things.
Fine.
But I just did this for an example, just so somebody has like a point of reference watching this. So what would stop any given just based on the model, based on the design, what would stop any given entity or multiple different entities from creating a subnet? So being the subnet owner, they could also be the majority validator, just based on stake. And they could also be many of the different miners. What's to stop that type of a model from being set up?
Okay, the self-mining, whether you self-mine or not. So the BitTensor community are not stupid. They can spot these things a mile off. And secondly, will your subnet improve if you're the only one mining it? Because as soon as your code base comes out, everyone will start to mine and dig into your code. And looking through the network stats on a site like Tau Stats, it becomes very, very clear where the flow of funds are going, how things are being scored. They can be a majority validator, but only once they have the confidence that everyone else is going to read their code. And if you read the code that all the validators have to run and you run that code as a validator, you can see the results. You can see where the flows are going and if that's true, and you can also see the outputs. So let's say it's an image. Let's use your example. It's an image subnet, and you have all the miners producing images of a cat, and yet the one that's winning, and you're running a couple of miners that are producing beautiful images of cats, and yet the one that you're seeing as scoring incentive is some weird pixelated child's drawing that isn't a cat. And you look at that and go, hold on a minute, why is that one? Something's fishy here. And then you can look into the incentive mechanism. How are they being scored? And in order for them to do that, they would have to go as far as literally manipulate the validator code to say, we're sending incentive to our models. And the moment that this was spotted in the community, the real validators, ones with weight, would come in and say, well, because bear in mind, they only have stake weight
But
majority.
in this hypothetical example, the people that are gaming the system do have the majority vote on the
They
very
won't,
subnet.
though.
They
They
are the
won't. They would
incentive.
have to have more stake than Tau Stats, Yuma, OTF,
But what I'm saying
Tau.com.
is, it could be y'all gaming the system. I'm not saying that you are. I'm saying that because you have so much of a stake and because of this model is set up, basically, the model almost, I mean, I don't know exactly what y'all said in the docs, but the model itself kind of depends on an honest majority at the validator level.
Well, are you suggesting that all of
The
the
largest holders
entities
could
building
easily
on
be gaming the
BitTensor come
system. Yes.
together to let you so first of all, we're all highly competitive. We're high, and the only thing, you look at Tau and Tau.com, we have competing products on the market. You look at Yuma and Tau Stats, we're competing for institutional and retail stake. We're all competing at many, many levels. And the one thing that we all agree on, regardless of many, many things we don't always see eye to eye on, is the building and betterment of the network. And I guess this is the same for anything. This is LIBOR. What if all the entities that we trust come together and collude to do something? Well, in any blockchain, what if all the validators that are supposed to independently verify blocks come together and go, hey guys, this works in Bitcoin. All the Bitcoin miners come together and go, let's all pretend that this is the answer. And it's not. Well, in a hypothetical situation, it's true. OTF, Yuma, Tau Stats, and all of the other people that validate on the network could get together, run a validator or something, and lie. It's on the blockchain. Everyone would see it, and everyone would say everyone on this network is colluding.
How would they see it when you say it's on the blockchain? The only thing that, from my understanding, that the validators are submitting to the blockchain, they're submitting to Yuma
Are the weights,
consensus,
the
is the
scores,
weights itself, not
the
the entire work that went into achieving the weights. It's kind of like advanced
yes.
math where, your professor says, hey, give me
The
the answer,
weight
but
the
also you
weights
have
are
to show your work.
recorded. The weights are recorded on the blockchain. The work exists through the subnet, and the subnet code
It's
is
just not
open
on
source.
chain.
But anyone can run that code. Any validator, anyone can run that code and get those outputs. So you can run that code and
But
get
that
those
doesn't
images back
stop
in
that doesn't
seconds.
stop the inherent flaw here to where the largest holders can still game the system. Just because everybody else can run the code, it's like what really matters
And
is
to
the
what
dominant
end?
players.
See, because you have to bear in mind, all of the large entities have competing subnets. They're not coming together. Like to what end? Or to what end? To get more emissions
To max extract as long as possible,
on a single subnet.
or across numerous different subnets.
Find me a subnet where any of those entities are working together. It doesn't exist.
I'm not saying that I can verifiably prove it's happening. What I'm saying is that the model allows for it, and it would be very difficult to detect. Your own response about how this would get handled and how this would get corrected is the largest holders would come in and right the ship and, correct the bad behavior or catch the manipulation. But if the largest holders themselves are the ones gaming the system, who's overseeing them?
But you, I'm thinking very carefully before I answer, because you are correct. The largest holders who have a vested interest in the network, the one thing they can agree on is when the network is being gamed. And
Unless they're
having
doing the
sat
gaming.
in these rooms, I just the mere like thought or insinuate, like just the reality of knowing, like seeing Jake and then Barry Silbert and then the guys all agreeing together to fuck with the network to try and extract some tau is just so ridiculous that I almost feel like it doesn't deserve a response. Like the
Well,
reality, you're
pause.
making
Well,
a
let's look in the
hypothetical point.
context. Let's look at the context of the industry that we're in. I would say 99% of teams that have launched projects have just extracted and then
But
that's
you're
it.
talking about single teams, but BitTensor isn't a single team. It's not
Single
a single
teams
team.
and people in the ecosystem and teams in the ecosystem colluding together to max extract from
So,
retail and the public.
will subnets try and do this? Absolutely. Subnets will come along and they will register and they will try and game the system. BitTensor has some of the best exploiters in tech. They are incredible. So they are absolutely there. They are doing everything they can to break your incentive mechanism. And now that any of them can register a subnet, they will also do anything they can to break the subnet code and the code that BitTensor. This is why it's such an ever-evolving system, because it's constantly perfecting and bettering itself, because these incredibly bright minds come along and do things you didn't think about. Like, hey, what if we just change the subnet parameters every block so no validators can actually register and stay on? And now we route to ourselves and then we buy back our own supply. And you're like, really? Are you guys doing that? All for like a couple of tau a day? All right, I get it. You'll make it, and it works. And we are stamping these out. And so these are being stamped out by a collusion of people that see this and really care about the network, which some people would still say at the moment is centralized. There is that criticism that the fact that the largest stakeholders and people with the biggest amount of skin in the game can come together and exact governance at the moment on a level that some may say that's not true decentralization. Jake put out an article, I think, in the last couple of days about this, that it is not truly decentralized yet. We are on the path to it. And so that criticism is completely valid and upheld. But to turn that around and say, well, it is possible for, I think is it I don't know how, like, I don't want to be like rude and disrespectful to say, like, because it's possible hypothetically, it like, to say that means you don't understand the structure of the people involved in BitTensor and how separated they are. These aren't people with the only common interest they have is the value of BitTensor. And if this happened, the value of BitTensor would go to nothing and they would all have shot themselves in the foot, face, stomach, finger. So
Well, I mean, in that hypothetical example, and again, I'm not saying that this has happened. That's not my critique. My critique is the model itself allows for this to happen. So if we're to assume that it's not happening at the highest levels, we're assuming that kind of on a trust basis. We're kind of having to say we're just going to trust that these guys aren't max extracting and insider dealing, and just to maximize their own, maximize their own
no, it
gain.
doesn't. It's completely provable on chain, because
How?
because we would all be colluding to set weights So you would see on any given, so this has to be at a subnet level. So find me a subnet where all of the main valid, so where the subnet owner no longer has majority, and all of the
You wouldn't even be able to tell
large,
that in,
hold on, hold
you
on,
wouldn't even be
hold
able to
on,
tell that
hold on,
anyways.
hold on, and all of the larger stakeholders are setting weights the same. It is happening. It is happening on a number of subnets. That's exactly what is happening. But where are those weights being set? They are being set to 0. The only thing they're colluding on is to not provide any emissions to that subnet. Nowhere else is there a subnet where all of the validators are aligned to set to a specific set of miners that are any that you cannot prove through the data those miners are producing the output. Because what you're
Prove
suggesting
through
is
what, prove through
what you're
what data?
suggesting, hold on, in this hypothetical situation, is that all of OTF, Tau stats, all the major stakeholders are setting weights to a bunch of miners that they all got together and registered themselves, and that they're then taking the funds from those miners to enrich themselves.
Yeah.
That suggestion means, with all due respect, you don't understand Bittensor.
But you already said that what I described was technically possible.
I don't think it is actually, because I think real miners would come by and do better. So you've got to then. So hold on a minute. So then we've also. No, it's not technically possible. Not only is it not it's not feasibly possible.
So it's not possible for a subnet owner
It's
to.
technically possible, as in it could be done with the structure, but in terms of that happening within the code and other miners rising up against it and stakeholders, no, it couldn't happen. The
When you
system would
say
not allow that to happen.
other miners rising up against it, what do you mean?
Because the outputs that you're producing have to be verifiable. They're verified. Like, and this subnet would need to have a large amount of emissions for this even to be worthwhile. It's just, it makes no sense, and I don't feel like there's any value in us arguing this, because to argue this just shows a lack of understanding about how Bittensor's incentive and emission structure works.
Well, I mean,
So
I've asked for, ways in which this could be stopped if it was happening. You've agreed that it's technically possible, that in theory it could happen, and that the thing that would stop this is other players in the ecosystem identifying it and rising up. But again, the
yes,
problem is that at the validator level, when they're submitting these weights to the blockchain, to UMA, all they're submitting is the weights, not all of the work that went in to producing those weights, not a verifiable
well,
proof
that's
that they
no.
followed the
There
exact.
is no, every subnet has any subnet that's worth its weight. Excuse the pun. Also has the work verifiable.
How?
On a per subnet. Hippias has its own blockchain on the side. A lot of the ones that use training and loss, they use Hugging Face. Hugging Face.
How is the
Weights
blockchain?
and
How is the
biases.
blockchain going to verify tons and tons of off-chain work? They're only getting the weights.
You have the submissions from the miners. Often the miners submit within trusted encryption environments. This is very nuanced to each one. You have chip attestation from Shoots and Targon. That's a part. If the subnet owner hasn't created a validation, an incentive mechanism, or validation mechanism that is 100% provable, then it's a terrible incentive mechanism that doesn't work.
Yeah, but any given attestation coming from a trusted execution environment would probably just say something along, it wouldn't include all of the work. It would just include, hey, I ran program X for what it is. I
Okay,
program X here. It's not going to show all of the work that went into it. And so you're
but
still kind of trusting that they ran the proper code, that the code itself was optimizing for quality. You're still there's still so many blind spots.
but you get the work and you can run that code and prove it. That's what the validators do. And so if you're saying and so this hypothetical situation is not in collusion with the subnet owner, or do they also happen to own the subnet?
I mean, it could be either or, but in this hypothetical, I think that it's entirely possible that the subnet owner is also the majority validator, and or it could be multiple different entities colluding, and they're also
Do you
choosing
have
their
any
miners
evidence? Have
specifically.
any evidence of this happening, of anything close to this happening? Or are we just putting a hypothetical
I
situation?
don't need
Because I
evidence.
can just turn
I don't
around to
need that.
Bitcoin and
That's
be
one of the
like,
main problems. One of the main problems would be detection because so much.
well, what happens if all Ethereum node runners get together and decide to make blocks and put out data that's completely rubbish
But
and yet agree on them? What happens if all Bitcoin miners come together at the same time and decide that they're going to agree on something completely farcical?
It's a drastically different comparison. We're not talking about Bitcoin or
Why?
Ethereum here because
You're
what we're
coming up with a
talking,
hypothetical situation
yeah,
that's
yes,
not
but
going
what
to
we're
happen. It
talking
isn't
about with
happening.
Bitcoin and Ethereum, that's all on chain. What you're talking about is all of the off-chain
And so are
work
the
that's
weights.
done being able to be verified and validated on chain. And it can't. You can't validate and verify all of that work when it's happening off chain and you're not even submitting all of the work to the blockchain itself. It can't process or store that much work on the blockchain itself.
You're so now you're pushing towards the argument of things aren't running on the chain, which was your main argument
No,
for
no, not not
Bitcoin.
not entirely. It's just first I was going over here's why, here's all the problems and all the areas for manipulation that could happen because it's not running on chain.
There are so many avenues for exploitation and manipulation in BitTensor, so many that are constantly being exploited and improved. And it's the whole point of the network in creating these perfect incentive mechanisms. And yet you've chosen the one to focus on that just makes no logical sense and isn't happening. And that's just very surprising. Like, I'm used to
How
answering
could you prove
questions.
this isn't happening?
Give
Because
me a
there's
subnet.
been
Give me a
complaints here
subnet. I could do
recently,
it on a subnet by subnet basis. Pick a number from 1 to 128.
but even with that, how would you prove that it isn't happening? You don't have access to all the information.
Pick a subnet.
You don't have
Instead of
access
coming
to
with hypothetical, give me a number between 1 and 128.
100. It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter.
100, right.
It
Got a
wouldn't matter.
subnet 100. I'm doing this on Tau stats. I can't, I don't
Yeah.
know, like, because
Yeah,
I
but Kat,
understand the
you
data
can't
and I
look at
understand.
all the validators' work. You can't independently verify 100% that the validators are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
Oh, yeah, but I'm going to narrow this search down because, first of all, this only is possible on a subnet where you're suggesting all of the main validators are setting the same weights.
Not
So that's
necessarily,
going
they
to
don't
narrow it
necessarily have
down.
to be setting the exact same weights
Yes,
every
they
single
do. If
time.
they're in collusion, they have to be. If we're going
Why?
to argue about this in this way, I can literally ask my agent to pull up a list of the subnets where all of the validators, the major players, are setting the same weights. And the answer on all of those
That's a
subnets,
straw man because you could still game the system without running
no,
the
because I can
exact
tell you, I
same
can
weights every single
100%
time.
guarantee that any subnet that's happening, those weights are being set to zero and all emission is being burned. So that's why now find me another subnet where you think this might be happening, where all of the major validators are setting the same weights. It
you
doesn't
keep
exist.
you keep changing the conversation. I'm not saying that this is happening on this specific subnet. What I'm saying is that the model allows for this. And what I'm basically explaining is how all this works and how it could be manipulated. But we've already seen here recently with the Covenant AI team, and I know that Jacob Steves put out some rebuttal to that, but even AI God has been posting about this too, posting about like who's actually validating, verifying, who's overseeing. You talked about the validators being the police. Who's policing the police?
The Algod, not AI God, Algod and Templar, both he has many criticisms. None of them are to do with validators. And the Templar exploit, bug, exit, shall we politely say, again, had nothing to do with validators. So I'm not sure who's policing the police. Who is policing the validators? The other validators. Do you think I'm going to let my competitors get away with something nefarious?
I mean, if I were to
You think I'm
assume
not going
no,
to
I
take
would just be
any
trusting you.
opportunity?
This is a trust-based system.
I
This is
do
this
no,
is
it's not
not
trust.
like
It's a
all
distrust.
of crypto is supposed to be,
It's
don't
based
trust,
on
verify,
distrust.
but your model is,
No,
don't
no.
don't verify, trust.
It's based on distrust. Exactly the opposite. Distrust. I don't trust them, so I'm also running the data and I'm also submitting my responses. I don't trust them.
But we have to trust you saying that.
No,
It's
you don't.
trust all the way
You
across
have
the
to
board.
trust that all of us don't trust each other and yet still manage to reach a consensus.
But
That's what trustless is.
whether or not that consensus reflects real value and
But
whether or not
hold on.
that
But
consensus.
can we take it to ICP? ICP have
You said you
a
wanted to make
closed.
this debate about
Yeah,
Tau
okay, let's not.
Bittensor and not ICP.
Yeah, but I did some research. I've got some bullet points.
We can have a
We can
follow
make
up.
it
We can have a
another day.
follow up
All
after
right.
this. I was just prepared for this
I'll be
conversation
nice.
specifically.
Um, so but this is this is a weird kind of dystopian question in terms of crypto is based on validation and consensus. Blockchain distributed ledger is based on consensus, and we all and it's a trustless consensus through code, right? And what you're but then
Generally,
everyone,
sure.
yeah. but what you're saying is, what if all of the decentralized, trustless entities within a distributed ledger collude together to corrupt it? That is possible with any distributed ledger validation system.
Yeah, but we're not talking about any one because Ethereum is drastically different than Bittensor, and Bitcoin is drastically different from Bittensor. When you're talking about where these areas, where these core problems could potentially happen, and that's all like off chain where you can't 100% verify things.
But you're so then you're picking up on the point that the work is not done on chain. Is this where this
That's
could lead?
that's part of the issue. I mean, another part of the issue is just I mean, we can move on to something else, just
No,
like
no, no, no. Yeah. I mean, it's very hard for me to continue to argue this, because if you understand how a subnet works, um, you'll understand why you could never perform the actual work on chain. How do you run a 72 billion parameter model on chain? And then you have 128 of these subnets, and you want to expand. Nothing needs to be. There are subnets with their own chain that seek to have a deeper level of trustlessness and accountability, but it's normally about flow of funds and sort of sub-incentive and referrals. So that is possible, but it is only the scoring that needs to be on chain.
why?
Well, why do you need to
Again,
run?
this is the problem of like you showing an answer on a math problem, but not actually showing your work. You can't actually verify that they came to that weight, that grade specifically, the exact way they were supposed to, and that it reflects
No,
real
but you
values.
don't have to, you see. Oh, that's the beauty. If the result is as you wanted it, how they got there doesn't matter. If
If
I
the
ask
result
you
for
to
who?
make me the most
The result
beautiful
for who?
picture of a cat, and I'm assuming you're using a GP model to do it, but it turns out that you got your child to draw it in a quarter of a second, or hypothetically, because we're on hypothetical, you did it some other way. If you've given me the commodity that I require, and I'm scoring you for that, and I can give it back to my customer and go, that was the best level drawing of a cat. How the hell did you do that? Like, I don't know, but that was the best one, and we don't care how they did it. They fulfilled our scoring criteria. There are subnets where we do require the miner to submit, to show their maths, so to speak. Some do, some don't. That depends on the subnet mechanism, and each subnet is unique in that way, which is why it's so hard to take something like, hey, image generation or text generation, because they're actually two of the hardest things to score. How do you score a text response on quality? It's arbitrary. How do you
I
score an image response on quality? It's arbitrary. It's very difficult. What you want to make sure is that it was executed in the environment and on the model that it was supposed to. And in which case you're scoring on volume, latency, speed. That's how you answer that. Because you can't turn around and say, was this image better than this image? Is that response better than that response?
Perfect. I just want to we can segue that right into the next. So if I'm going to ask ChatGPT or I'm going to ask one of the Gronk or one of these other for a model, it's me and the AI model, right? If they send me back an ugly image that, I just like, hey, this you completely missed on this, downvote, so on and so forth. And so it's a very A to B relationship as far as the feedback. With this particular model, you could have, let's just say, wanted to create an image. Let's just say you have 14, I don't know how many, the blue boxes are the miners, the black boxes are the validators, the red box is just the subnet owner or the subnet itself. Okay. So you could have 14 different AI models creating 14 different, through miners, creating 14 different pictures of a cat. And then you would have, let's say, 7 validators checking all of those different images. Then, after all of this is done, the user is going to get some image of a cat. Generally accurate as far as how that works.
This was accurate in 2023. This does not exist on Bittensor anymore.
So nobody's doing image generation or text generation.
Everyone's doing image generation, but if you come on as a user and you want to generate an image, choose your model. We'll give you a choice of the best closed source and open source models. What do you want? No one's been like, hey, we'll just make the best cat from all the available models and we'll decide which is the best cat, because good luck designing a validation mechanism for that.
That does answer one of my questions because that for in a general sense, like for let's just go back to when it was working this way. You would have 14. I mean, just think about the insane inefficiency here. And I would imagine this inefficiency problem does surface in other parts of subnets, if I had to guess. But it's like we don't have time to go subnet by subnet and go through every single one of those examples. But so just think about 14 different AI models all creating images. And then you have 7 different validators all running their own AI models, grading those images. You're talking about 20 different AI models involved for to
But
get one image of a cat. And you
so
don't
hold
even
on a
know
minute, it
if
gets
you're the
worse than
user.
that. You've had 14 sets of models and GPUs running to generate the image. You've had 7 validators probably regenerating the image themselves. Yeah, of course, that's not scalable, not sustainable, and would not work. However, if you're building a system that you're later going to use for all the things that Bittensor does, it's a very good way to build some of the architecture and iron out some of the problems and see what you should be doing in incentive mechanism design. So this is like, yeah, 2023 incentive mechanism design.
Got it. Okay, cool. Um, so that would address the human feedback problem because, in my personal opinion, on stuff like that, on subjective matters, you would want the human feedback, and you would want to give the human some degree of, options, and their preference would come into play here, especially on matters of very subject, like AI models grading other AI models makes perfect sense. I think this is going to be, this is going to continue to be a thing into the future for different types of use cases. But on subjective matters like this, okay, we've already covered that. So yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that was the answer because that does address
Yeah,
one of the
all of
different.
the inference subnets, most of their incentive mechanism is based on how you prove that the miner carried out the request within the environment with the correct parameters that you desired. And,
Got it.
and if you're doing it properly, the miner doesn't see the input or the output. They're responsible for providing the environment and optimizing the environment. Because that's what it comes to. If someone's optimizing to just produce a single image, they're not optimizing for inference at scale. They need to be optimizing for server capacity, network. This is a network commodity rather than an inference commodity.
Got it. Okay, cool. So, and another, I guess, a critique I would have or a concern that I would have is like realistically, in order for this to succeed, you have to take big picture, long term, you have to take market share from big tech. And a decent amount of market share in all reality, you would have to take market share from big tech. And they have like a huge, just a gargantuan, I can't even quantify the head start that they have, the amount of more resources that they have, the more personnel that they have, more data that they have, more funding. And at the end of the day, the big thing, in my personal opinion, is all of their embedded relationships with institutions and governments, and the fact that so many different people like me and numerous other people are already using these AI models because they're built into our existing applications. It's the most convenient thing to do so. You did mention earlier, and I want to push back on this a little bit, about why would somebody use Bittensor as opposed to big tech. And one of the first things you said was convenient, but I would argue the big tech model is going to be significantly more convenient because it's already built into all the applications and services that individuals are using, but especially institutions. Yeah. So love your thoughts on that.
Did Bitcoin beat Visa?
Up to this point, yet to be
No.
seen.
The answer is no. Bitcoin
Yet
isn't
to be,
trying
yet to
to.
get, but these are drastically different. Just because somebody,
Correct.
some,
Correct.
drastically different
They are
compared.
drastically different systems addressing parallel problems, but not trying to beat the other one. And this is where this goes. What BitTensor is able to do, and one of the interesting things is how much closed source centralized AI at the moment is heavily subsidized. Some articles going on. It's not sustainable. The price, with the huge amounts of VC funding pouring in, burning cash that you wouldn't believe to try and compete to provide to get market share as inference providers to then slowly start to hike up the prices and realize that as our demand for all of this increases that it's not sustainable. Whereas Big Tensor is going it the other way around. It's coming like prove your sustainability from the outset.
Isn't shoots being subsidized like 20 to 1, 15 to 1?
The shoot subsidization is a very interesting one. No, what they are working, but subsidized in what way? By the network, not
Meaning
by
based on how much
VCs.
revenue they have coming in from paid usage. But maybe I'm wrong on this. I looked at a number that was like maybe 2.5 million compared to 50 million in emissions.
We're talking annually here, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Now let's have a look at how
All
much.
I need to know is their emission significantly higher than their paid usage? If so, they're
Yeah,
being
absolutely,
subsidized by the
absolutely,
network.
yes.
So
The
they're being
network is
subsidized too.
supporting them at a tiny fraction of what VCs are pouring into their competitors. So they are outperforming their competitors on a tiny amount, and yet they are absolutely hyper focused to be what we call it like emission, not emission negative, emission. I don't know what the word is now.
Neutral.
Emission equal. That's what subnets are working to from the outset, optimizing their price per billion tokens or their revenue per billion tokens, and they're already doing that. Now you look at the companies like OpenRouter that are raising 50 million on a 500 million valuation, burning through. The numbers are so far out there, and yet BitTensor subnets, in order to survive, have to immediately be optimizing for this. So the priority is already there. But in answer to your question, which is how is BitTensor taking on big tech? It's giving things that big tech can't do. There are certain things that big tech just cannot optimize for and can't do quick enough. And a lot of big tech are actually supplying and working within BitTensor. There are subnets that use skill from big tech, and the speed at which they can kind of iterate and get this out to different products, it's just not happening in big tech. And so, looking at something like just trying to think of examples. I don't think it has to beat big tech, but there is a world where has open source software overtaken closed source software?
Whether or
No,
not open
more.
source, yeah, I mean, but that would be a
Yeah,
separate,
yeah, we could look at a
maybe a
lot of things.
related but separate issue.
Yeah. I don't know what your software stack looks like, but you look at something like looking at my browser, password protection. One password, LastPass, and whatever the other big ones are, have a much higher market share than something like Bitwarden, which is open source. But that doesn't mean there's no space for it. There's a lot of open source software solutions that haven't beaten. Look at something like Mattermost against Slack. No, Slack has a, but it doesn't mean there's no place for Mattermost. It doesn't, and as we evolve, and people start, there's a big societal divide between those that understand code and understand digital commodities, and also understand that software as a layer is thinning in its value, and what's really important is the data being supplied underneath it. Anyone can build software now in OpenClaw or in Claude code. I can make myself a little piece of software that does something that I need it to do. I don't have to go and subscribe or buy something. I can have it do exactly what I want. What's most important is where that data comes from, and I want that data to be competitively priced against the market, a market that's continuing to evolve and improve rather than being limited by a closed source supplier. That doesn't mean that most people will go to closed source suppliers because it's easy. There's a reason why most people just go to the big supermarkets to buy their stuff, and yet there's a growing movement of people that want to buy from independent suppliers, local producers, markets, and that's a growing subset of people. And I think it kind of exists in this way. And as you can, it's the one thing it's easy to push back on is the models, closed source models are so big. The stuff coming out of BitTensor, it's only 72 billion parameters, 100 billion parameters. The models on the closed source are getting bigger and bigger. There is still a divide, but the close in that sense is the divide is being closed rapidly, very rapidly. And then some of the things that are being built on open source technology and on BitTensor are pushing past what the closed source people can do. There is no closed source GPU rentals more efficient than on BitTensor. And there's two of them. There's two competing companies doing things slightly differently. No one. You cannot get GPU now, like a B200, bleeding edge GPUs anywhere instantly other than on BitTensor.
Yeah, my point wasn't that there wouldn't be some type of a market, or you couldn't take some degree of the market share from big tech, or that there's not some or that just because open source models do have a percentage of the market versus big tech AI models, so on and so forth, that my main point was that, like, Not that it's not possible, but what is the core value proposition? I mean, because you said a number of things. You said convenient. I would argue big tech is going to be more convenient because it's already built into all the different
But
systems and
where do
people
you
are already
define the
using it.
line between big tech? When does something become big tech? What parameters does it have to fulfill to be big tech?
I'm not necessarily, I don't think it is
Because you
necessarily
do
model,
realize
model
there
specific as
are
long as it's an AI model that's run through big tech systems and
yeah, but
their models. Yeah.
okay, because big tech for me just means likely had an IPO, millions of users,
Google,
and
Anthropic, OpenAI, XAI, the big players.
okay,
Because
so
again, the whole point that I'm trying to get to is that like, what is the pitch for this over big tech? Because the things that you said, convenient, I would argue big tech's more convenient. You've also said the subsidy
the
problem
pitch
with big
has to
tech, which
be that the
I
product is
agree.
better for
I
you.
agree the subsidy
The
problem
product has to be
is
better.
an issue with big tech, but there's also a subsidy problem itself with Bittensor, which you've already acknowledged. And you haven't really laid out a case for the things that you have mentioned, I've refuted, and you haven't laid out a case for why Bittensor over big tech.
For me, the swaying factor is at product level. The product being built, if the product is better, what product are you using from Anthropic? And that that's a user specific. I might be using just their inference model stuff directly via API, and in which case the model outputs have to be better or it needs to be cheaper. Very simple. Or I might be using an actual consumer product like a chat interface. So subscription needs to be less, and the results need to be as good, if not better. A better product has, it has more traction. Now you're still looking at this from an inference point of view, and so much of this is narrative at the moment. More people than we realize have no an idea what's going on with AI. They still don't know how to use so there's just the word GPT, which kind of is like the Google thing. Well, Google means to search, to GPT means to look something up with this weird AI thing that all the kids are talking about. At that point, big tech, as you call it, will always be what feeds the masses. But at what point are companies that might become big tech drawing from BitTensor? Well, there is a large reality for that. That large companies could be using storage on Hippias, which is on BitTensor. You wouldn't know. It doesn't matter. They might be using GPU rentals to run their big tech AI company from Targon or from Leon.
Yeah,
BitTensor is
they
an
could, they
infrastructure layer.
might. There's a lot of things that could potentially happen, but that's not really a value proposition for BitTensor as opposed to big tech.
Well, it is. It's just an infrastructure layer under big tech within tech.
So, but like, what are the core problems that are even being solved here with BitTensor that would cause somebody to use alternative services like BitTensor? Like, what would you
Uh,
say are the core problems being solved here?
I'm going to just go through the sublet list again. So we can look at where with big tech can I
Those are
spin
use
up.
cases and name. I mean, I'm talking about core problems versus because when you say things like storage or compute or whatever it
Well,
is,
I'm going to go through the top ones, and I'm going to tell you the core problem they solve, and you'll see just how varied they are. So you keep talking about phones, but you look at something. So yeah, Shoots would give me a centralized big tech competitor where I can spin up serverless compute for any model other than going into Hugging Face and clicking deploy. But I can't do that with my own private models, and I can't do it with a trust enrichment environment. Great. I've
but
covered
if
the
Shoots,
GPU.
pause really quick on Shoots. If Shoots is offering that high of quality of a service and a product relative to big tech, then why is it that their incoming paid usage is like 1/20th of what their subsidies are from the network? Like,
Have
why
you
isn't that
seen their growth
reflective in how
chart?
much paid usage is coming in from them?
Have you seen their growth charts and their usage charts? Have you looked into their metrics?
I've looked into some of them. Yeah, I probably haven't looked into every single
It's
metric that they have.
incredible for a startup that has no VC funding that's been around for a year and a half. Biggest open source model provider on OpenRouter. Like that's incredible.
I'm not
And
saying that it's I'm
we're
not saying that
worrying
it's not
whether
I'm
they've
saying it's not
misused
reflective
15
in the
million
fact
of
that they have a
funding from the
20 to 1
network.
subsidy rate.
They're using 15 million of funding to pay their suppliers that the network has afforded them. Like that's not a bad thing. That's proof of BitTensor funneling emissions to a project with real value.
Real
Let's move
value,
past
real
this.
value would be again, it's there's a lot of trust here
What are
because
you
again,
expecting that within a year suddenly they're making hundreds of millions? Find me a net revenue positive AI inference provider.
I'm not saying I'm
They
not
don't exist right now.
you
They
use
are all
you
funded
use the
by
subsidy
massive
argument
subsidies.
against big tech, but the same thing applies to BitTensor. What I'm trying to do is find differentiators from big tech and from BitTensor, and the things that you throw out either apply to both or are kind of
Because
erroneous or irrelevant.
each subnet is producing a commodity which usually powers a product which has parallels within big tech. Because big tech
Who has
is
all the
such a
users,
broad
all the
word. You look
funding,
at
all the
something
head
like
start.
Nova.
Yeah, so creating similar types of services to what big tech is offering, that's not okay. Well, so why leave big tech?
Okay, so open source. Look at okay. I'm going to go something completely different. Nova, open source drug discovery. Should we be moving drug discovery and research away from big pharma and into an open environment, or should we leave it behind the closed doors of
If I'm looking
big
at this idealistically and saying what I would want as a random individual sitting here, or what might be best for just the overall, sake of pharmaceuticals in a general sense, I might have one answer, but my opinion is kind of irrelevant. What really matters is the power players and how they choose to manage their own monopolies that they already have, and whether or not they even leave any door open for any other competitors. I've just
then
seen
this
big
stops.
tech dominate for 25 plus years and
Well,
nobody else even being able
okay.
to like crack in.
So then, excuse me, this stops being an argument about Bittensor. This starts being an argument about the dominance of big tech. And what are we going to do about the dominance of big tech and big conglomerates outside of tech? Look at our food industry. Look at everything. So
But it
this
is about
stops being
BitTensor
a
because
Bittensor argument.
the target market is big tech's market that you have to take users and capital away from. And so I'm trying to differentiate like what's the big value, like what's the sales pitch for BitTensor? What's the big problems that it's solving that big tech can't do?
But for all of the subnets that I personally run, the product is better and cheaper. They
It's
all
kind of
have
an
a
opinion, it's
product.
kind of an opinion-based statement. Better and cheaper than what?
That's not an opinion. That's literally benchmark metrics and fact. That is not an opinion. I have metrics on each one to back it up.
And you would also
Benchmark
have to
metrics.
consider the subsidy level, like what your I mean incoming revenue, real paid uses versus how much of this is being funded by emissions and inflation.
The customer doesn't care. The customer cares about using the product.
Yeah, but that's essential to the business model itself. It's
But
like
it's,
if the economics don't make sense because you're having to, just the same argument used against big tech, this heavy subsidy ratio can't continue. Like if that's the same ratio or you're dealing with a similar problem yourself, you know,
but I've seen the math as what these companies need to make our companies in order to be to have revenue beyond emissions, to essentially not need BitTensor or not need the emissions, and they are very achievable targets. Having run many businesses and worked for many businesses, they are very achievable targets in order to exceed emissions. And very interestingly, and I often argue with subnets when they're setting up, you must build a subnet that doesn't require emissions. So you look at something like Block Machine, which is subnet 19 is RPC infrastructure. So it's a direct competitor to QuickNode and Alchemy. They only pay the miners, the people producing or running the RPC nodes, for it's not inference, is it? Because it's but for queries which they are being paid by customers. So the miners only get paid for something that is directly correlated to revenue. There is zero wastage. Zero.
got it. And I'm gonna kind of like move on just because I mean like I get what you're saying, but like my whole if you're positioning yourself against big tech, and so like that's why the conversation about big tech is so relevant, is that in order for this to succeed, it has to succeed against a percentage of the
I'm
market
not
share.
positioning myself against big tech. You are.
No,
We are positioning ourselves as
your
building.
founder is in the very video that I responded to, he's directly positioning. And when this thing happened, when
No,
it
no, no.
propagated,
It's so easy, as you have done, for anyone to go like, oh, this is an AI network. How do you feel you're taking on Anthropic and OpenAI? It's
but when
such a
your
broad
founder
question.
positions yourself like that publicly, and
When
even
asked this question, he came out, and I don't have the response. I'm sure you maybe have the response in front of me. I can go back and look at some notes. I don't want to be arguing Jake's words, but I've been asked that question myself, and It's a bit like, oh, come on, we're not trying to be OpenAI and Anthropic. We're not
I,
trying to be.
I'm not suggesting you are. You just again, for this to succeed, it needs to take a percentage of that market share. That was the only point that I'm making. And so like, what's the
I
case
don't
for that?
agree.
That's really what I wanted to
So
get
you
to.
throw that out there for Bittensor to succeed, it has to take a percentage of Anthropic and OpenAI's market share. Strong disagree. Strong disagree. Bittensor grows as their market share grows, as public interest and consumption of AI inference grows, which is what those two companies sell. It generally brings attention to the overall market of business commodities optimized and produced using GPU and artificial intelligence. Bittensor's market is so much broader than inference. You have to understand this. That you
Got it.
can't just say, you make a comparison and say BitTensor here and OpenAI Anthropic here. It's like saying BitTensor here and ICP there. We both did our research and realized that that was a really stupid debate to have. Yeah. So none of us are coming with that. And so to come on that same level is just, it's not a like for like debate.
All right. Well,
If
I
you
mean, I will grant you that to some degree because there's so many different subnets, and any given subnet can offer whichever product or commodity that they want to. And so I will grant you that on some level. That being said, there has been multiple different examples in recent history where Jacob Steves, the co-founder, is directly positioning this as an alternative and as a decentralized alternative to
Mhm.
big tech AI. And so that's
Yeah.
why I'm bringing that up. If that's
You know
coming
what?
directly
What
from the
what
top.
aspect of it? The closed doors, and this might go back to to you talking about open validation and verifying outputs, but the closed door betterment, production of models, gating of inference, pricing. This is not an open market. Anthropic and OpenAI might be competing against each other, but they decide their pricing. BitTensor's pricing, very often in good subnet designs, is market driven. And so this is where you're going against the closed door mentality of big tech versus trying to build something that is open to all and competitive and fluid in its competitiveness.
I would argue if the main subnet is shoots, and again, I'm not criticizing shoots for being heavily subsidized by emissions because I understand the subsidy problem with big tech as well. I'm just saying that if it's 20 to 1 subsidies, then I would argue that's not really necessarily market driven at this point because the market itself isn't showing the demand for paid usage to even get close to the overall emissions. I know that's a long-term goal, but it's like right now it's just being heavily subsidized and the market itself is not showing the extreme demand that would offset those subsidies.
It's quite funny. Shoots is a bit of a victim of its own success. It was such a good subnet so early on when the quality of other subnets was not comparable, and a lot of subnets were still doing a lot of development and just weren't as publicly verifiably functional with a product as shoots. And so the incentive of BitTensor had to go somewhere and flowed in proportions to shoots that makes it easy to have this argument of, oh, they were getting so much compared to what they were generating. I mean, we talk about this with our subnets that are burning the emission that we don't give to miners, and we say, oh yeah, we're at 95% now, so we're only using 5% of our emissions, and we're trying to drive that down to 20%, 30%, 40%. But the more popular we become, the more people that will invest in us and will actually counterweight against that. The thing that happens is this organic funding of teams is allowing these teams to iterate and develop. So those that are doing the best are being rewarded by the network. So you can look at it as wastage, but the teams that prove that they are taking that funding and not wasting it are the teams that continue to get rewarded. And those that don't prove it, emissions go to zero very, very quickly.
Yeah, but again, it's more so about the back to the middle layer here, the verifiability of the work being done, the verifiability of this goes back into the earlier part of the conversation. And if there was collusion from the top down, I don't see anything that would be able to stop that. Like, for example, like go back to the earlier question, who's policing the police?
There is no police on. So let's take shoots, for instance. The shoots validation is done
So there
by
is no police for
team.
the main police.
The shoots validation is done by the shoots team. They run the main validator, and any other validator has access to accounting. So they have access to all of that data. Anyone can pull it. anyone can pull it, but and anyone can verify it, and it's on chain. And you're going to tell me that the work isn't
What's
on
on
chain?
chain? Yeah, the work's yeah, because it's not. Is the weights are on chain. The
Look,
work is not.
John Durbin is a much more the leader of the founder of Shoot, far more intelligent than me, and he would come in and in 2 seconds he would let you know why it's verifiable. I don't know their code enough, but I can promise you they didn't get to the where they are with everyone constantly judging and criticizing and looking for fault and looking to find where there's issues by having something non-verifiable that they could just make up.
Got it. My
Yeah.
whole point is that like I get what you're saying, but that's kind of to some degree a like a trust me statement as opposed to
No,
here's a
it's not
hundred.
a trust me statement. It's verifiable. It is verifiable. I
You can't
promise you. And
explain how.
if you would like me to go away and do some more research and speak to John and come back to you with a document that you can publish alongside this interview as to why I can take Shoots as an example, or pick any other top 10 subnets as to how it's verifiable and how you yourself can go and verify it, I'm more than happy to do that.
Okay. And I mean
But
I
it's
don't
going to
want
be
to
on the
like
first
get
subnet.
overly, I mean, I know Shoots is like the main subnet. I'm more so just talking about the model design and the flow of everything itself. But yeah, I get what you're saying, 100%. Um, I don't, we probably don't have time to get into all the X's and O's with trust execution environment and everything else. And this can easily, there can easily be a follow-up conversation if you're interested in that. But I will say, I mean, you already conceded this point earlier. I'm just, BitTensor, and this is from Jacob Steve's article from the last couple days. But you already conceded this point, so this is not like a really a point of contention. I would just say that the way that this is being marketed to the crypto space is being marketed as decentralized AI. And when I've seen him, and again, I know this is not you, so I'm not trying to, but when I've seen him like position this in the public here recently, he has been positioning this as a decentralized AI. And that's why big tech bad, centralized AI, BitTensor
You know
good.
why? There are
As,
elements
as
of
a as a
BitTensor.
marketing pitch, I don't know. I
No,
mean, because
no, no, no,
now he's
no.
saying it's not
No.
decentralized.
So let me correct you. There are many elements of BitTensor that are completely decentralized. Anybody can
But the
spin up a
incentive
subnet.
model itself, the
It is not gated.
token distribution, no
Anybody can
pre-mine, that's
create a
great.
subnet. Anyone can participate in a subnet. There is no gating, no barrier to entry, no waiting list, nothing at all. It is open and permissionless to anybody. That's what makes it decentralized.
Decentralization and centralization is a spectrum, and at any one network, to your point, there can be aspects of it that are centralized. There can be aspects of it that are decentralized. So we agree on that in a general sense. I'm just talking about from him, like specifically, is openly saying,
But what he's referring to is governance, because we are incredibly critical of ourselves. We're always looking to improve. And so, do we have truly decentralized governance? No. Cool. Find me some decentralized governments, true decentralized governments that really works, and we'll look at the parts of it, and it's a conversation we have. Find me true decentralized governance that works.
well, I mean, the whole bit tensor model is really an incentive-based system. It's many more things than that, but at its core, it's an incentive-based system. And he's saying bit tensor at its core economic incentive layer is currently not decentralized. And so, I would just say that even though there might be other aspects to it that have a decentralized nature or are decentralized, if you look on a spectrum, the core incentive layer itself, even per him, is not decentralized. And we've been over that there's nobody policing the police. And so it's like, moving forward, just for like marketing and branding and everything else, like I don't think this should be marketed as decentralized AI for all the different reasons that I've been over, and on top of what Jacob is saying himself.
Well, we'll have to agree to disagree. As you said, decentralized is a word with many spectrums. I believe participation in a network is decentralized. I believe that on top of the decentralized infrastructure layer are centralized companies building centralized businesses, of which I'm responsible for a number of them. And I believe that decentralized governance is being formed. But what Jacob is usually referring to and is criticized for are the changes and evolution to the network and the creation of the network. Who wrote the code for Bitcoin in the beginning, in the early years? Satoshi. It wasn't decentralized. It was one man leading it, and this is always the changeover from something that is created by someone more, a group of people with a vision who guide it towards decentralization. That it's a path. And I don't think, and I've seen there was a BitTensor fork called Commune AI, and the founder was someone who had worked and been involved with Bittensor to some form or another, and was critical of this and tried to launch something that we flick the switch immediately to decentralization, to anyone can, it's true decentralization. Shit show would be a kind word to use, and no longer existent, because you need those that really understand the direction. Anyway, this is all, this is me talking about why in Jake we trust to some levels, and is fuel for the argument of no, that's not true decentralization. But I think it's not a point that overlaps with who's policing the police, unless you're talking about who is governing the changes that are made on the network. Well, there is a triumvirate there, so there is a governance process to putting things into the network. I can rest assured you, and you can. This last week is an absolute show of this. Every single participant on the Bittensor network is highly critical of everything that Jake, no, not everything he does, but they are on him. So everyone is policing the dear leader, shall we say. So unlike North Korea, we are allowed to speak out against our dear leader, and we are allowed to challenge everything he does, and we are allowed to comment all over his PRs, suggest code changes, argue with him, submit proposals, and it's sometimes infuriating for the pace of change, because some people come with bias depending on whether they're a validator or a subnet owner or a miner or an exploiter or what they've built their business on. And finding this balance is incredibly hard. But it's happening. It is happening on this network. And we're not really trying to kind of persuade people to say, like, we are true decentralized AI, come and give us your money. Come and find out what we're doing. And there's a reason why so many people have become so sucked into this rabbit hole, and it's not just about personal enrichment. Yes, a lot of people made a lot of money in the early days, but most networks had a lot of people making a lot of money in the early days. That's the nature of blockchain and early emission schedules. There was no pre-mines or anything like that. There was no pre-sales, pre-mines, VC allocations. So it's just that people that really believed in this network very early on. But most of them then stayed on to fund people with far more talent than them to make this into what they believe it would be. Because I can assure you, when I joined this network in the end of 2022, it was a long way from here. A long way. We've come a very, very, very long way. And I'm a staunch critic of the ideology of decentralization, and how sometimes we overbuild for an ideology when the reality is that enterprise procurement departments want SLAs. They want to pay invoices to companies that are registered. There are elements of this where you're like, oh, we just remove all responsibility and we're completely decentralized and no one can stop us. But that's not how business works. So that and each subnet then gets the ability to choose how they want to address that themselves. Anyway, it's an interesting one. It's a good place to be. It stimulates me, gets me out of bed in the morning. I understand why an outsider can take a distance view of the whole ecosystem and say, well, hold on, yeah, no, I get it. We try and refute claims and we try and educate, but it's possible to maintain a single angle of criticism and say, well, I think this can be true, and therefore that's my reason to not want to get involved in Bittensor. And if you think that it's possible and likely that a cabal of high influence validators are manipulating the network for their own good, and that's truly your view, well, then my sensible advice would be don't invest in that network. But unless you have absolute proof of that, don't go around telling other people that that's happening.
That's not been my case in this.
I didn't mean that as an accusation,
yeah,
but what I mean is take that as your due diligence and say, well, I'm not happy because I see this might happen or that might happen. And so, yeah. And if
my issue would be more so like, even absence of, let's just say everything in the ecosystem is 100% above board. There's no collusion. There's no extracting happening.
It's
Anything
not.
let's just the hypothetical scenario. In that case, like for me, just knowing that the model would allow for it and knowing that I would then have to put my trust in people, large holders of Tau, that they're not going to be manipulating the system for their own financial gain, just knowing that that amount of trust assumption I would need to put is just, that would be more so my issue as opposed to I have direct verifiable proof that it is 100% happening. It would be just the model itself allows for it. And so I would have to trust. And so this is just not ideal for me personally, but it might be, to your point, ideal for other people and other market participants.
It's on a subnet. I think you're looking at it on an overreaching, and we look at it on a subnet basis. And it is possible for you to jump into any subnet and verify. And if the subnet is not verifiable, you can be damn sure they're probably not getting emissions. They're being absolute, they're on a path to deregistration.
This
Any
kind of goes
subnet.
back to the earlier conversation we were having about not being able to 100% verify and validate all the work at the middle layer.
Any,
But
it's an open network, a decentralized network, so anyone with enough tau can register a subnet, and that subnet is immune for 60 days. So you can come on with 700 tau now and register a subnet, and then do nothing. Maybe sell a bunch of false hope, tell some lies. The validators will set your burn code to 0, so you might be able to extract through a little bit of lies and a little bit of hype some tau along the way, and then very, very quickly you'll go to nothing. And it's no different from anyone launching a business in traditional business space, anyone launching a blockchain. If you come along and you want to do something dishonorable to try and do a little bit of extracting, there are usually paths. It's a lot harder in Bittensor than anywhere else, I can tell you that. But no system is flawless. And what Bittensor does do is adapt and close its flaws and loopholes. And that's what it continues to do.
understood. Well, it is time, and so I don't want to keep you any longer. I do greatly appreciate your time. I
No
can't
problem.
overstate that, and I don't want to run past the time that I had blocked off for this, because I know you have a schedule, you're busy, you have other things going on, and so yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered everything over the last 5, 10 minutes, with your explanations. So I'm happy wrapping it up there if you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and just turn off the record and